Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, where you will find interesting guests and discussions about cutting-edge topics to assist you on your journey. The Quantum Guide Show is ideally suited to the newly awakened and for those who feel isolated by their newfound beliefs. The mind, body, and spirit thrive when we have a mission, and there is no greater mission than to become the change that we wish to see in the world. So hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube, Odyssey, and Telegram channels, and share this show with your friends. Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. In episode 103, I am very happy to bring back my returning guest and friend, well-known author and MUFON investigator, Preston Dennett. Today, we're going to talk a bit about his latest book called Not From Here, Volume 4, Selected UFO Articles. But before we talk about this amazing new book, here's a little background information about Preston Dennett. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. Preston is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 30 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Several of his books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Phenomena Magazine, Mysteries Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has been translated into several different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. Preston has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He has taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he lectures across the United States. Preston currently resides in Southern California. Check out his website, www.prestondennett.weebly.com. Preston, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me back on, and congratulations, 103 episodes. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's coming along. And I'm on quite a few different platforms, so folks can watch this show or listen to it on Spotify and Apple and Odyssey and Telegram and Signal, and you're going to be just posted everywhere, Preston. Thank you so much for coming. So you've got another new book. I'm really excited about this. I can't wait for you to tell us more about it. And I'm wondering if we could start off by you telling us what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, well, this is, of course, volume 4 of an ongoing series. And what really was the inspiration for me was one day I was going through my boxes of magazines and stuff and looking at some of the articles I had written many years ago. I mean, as you know, I've been in this field for, I don't even want to say how long, but it's over 35 years, most of my life, honestly. And I realized, I've written like 100 articles. And some of these were, of course, excerpted from various books, but most weren't. And these were some really cool subjects which I had explored. And as you know, magazines have kind of a short shelf life.
Mm-hmm.
The issue comes out and then it's pulled off the magazine racks and buried. And even these days, magazines are really not a big thing. Everything's gone digital. And I realized a lot of my research, a good portion of it, was not available to people. And it was kind of disappointing because some of this stuff is really interesting. I was pulling out these articles. I'm like, wow, I'd completely forgotten that I'd written these articles. And I think one of my specialties, if you will, is exploring sort of unknown cases or odd and bizarre patterns in UFO contact, areas of ufology that haven't gotten a whole lot of attention or been fully explored, or some researchers are just frankly afraid to touch at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking at these articles. I'm like, you know what? I've heard more cases of, for example, in the first volume, I talked about cases of people who've had ET contact by telephone.
By telephone.
Yes, not kidding. And another article which I thought was really intriguing was UFOs over graveyards, because I did not know that was a thing, but on all these cases. And so I started taking all these articles and updating them, and often they would grow to more than twice their original size with all the new cases, and started putting them in book form. And I was so happy because this worked out really well. The books turned out to be pretty popular and had so many that I'm like, okay, this is going to be an ongoing series, and just came out with volume 4.
Mm-hmm.
I always save some good ones because there is so much, as you know, there are layers and layers and rabbit holes and all kinds of stuff going on with UFO contact. It's high strangeness for sure. And these books are really diving deep into these contact episodes that really don't fit the standard model of contact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what inspired me.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I'm really glad you did that, because I agree, a magazine article, it passes kind of similar to doing even podcasts, people want to see the latest ones and forget about the older ones. Sometimes they go back though and watch them, but I'm really glad that you have collected up that really valuable information. People are so curious about anything ET related these days, and unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation, but there's a lot of accurate information too. So I think that's probably why you have such a good following, is because people have come to rely on your information as being well documented, super interesting. What more could we ask for? So I'm wondering if you want to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I always try to vet the information I get, and all these accounts that I do put in these books are fully footnoted and sourced, because I do think you're right. There is misinformation, and people are at a loss as to where we find good, reliable information on the subject. So I've really strived to do that, put out firsthand, facts only cases instead of speculation and wild gossip that we see so much in this field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's so, so important. So I'm wondering if you want to just give us, to start off, a little bit of an overview of the book. What's it basically about? And then maybe we can delve into some specifics.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. I gave 10 chapters, each focusing on a different aspect. And I think if you read the book, like all the previous volumes of The Not From Here, you'll get a full spectrum of the phenomenon, and everything from sightings to landings and face-to-face contact and onboard experiences and crash retrievals and the paranormal aspects as well. So I try to do that with each volume. And I think that's true with this one. But this one's it's so interesting, some of the stuff that I find. I mean, writing it always surprises me as well, in a certain extent. And I think as a researcher and author, this, you do it somewhat for yourself too. to clarify. But yeah, some of the chapters in this book include, well, the first one is about UFO car lift cases.
I was gonna ask you about that. I don't think I've ever even heard of that before. Can you tell us what it is and then a bit about it?
Yeah, I put this in the first chapter because it was one of my favorite subjects. As you may know, a lot of people see UFOs while driving down a remote highway, often late at night, and this object, these craft, will drop down out of the sky and chase their cars down the road. UFOs do seem to have a penchant for doing this. UFO car chases are a big thing in this field. But these cases take that to a whole new level for sure. And I remember I got my own case once, and which was during the Topanga Canyon UFO wave in 1992. A couple was driving through Topanga Canyon. This is in Southern California, when they saw this craft, this glowing disc-shaped object, and they felt it was following them. They had no idea that many other people throughout the canyon were seeing UFOs on that night. But this craft came closer and closer, and then suddenly it's over their car, maybe 50 feet up, sends down a beam of light and pulls their car into the sky.
My goodness.
Yeah, they said it was very frightening, actually. And they did have missing time. I do believe they were taken on board. This is, in essence, what's going on here. However, in these other cases, I don't think most of them are being taken on board. Because how I got interested in this was writing UFOs over Nevada. I ran 3 cases in a row. And I'll just outline one of the cases which really impressed me. And honestly, Karen, I would have discarded this case if I hadn't run into others because it's so unusual. But this is actually the earliest I could find, chronologically speaking. It was in 1959 in Goldfield, Nevada. This is a very desolate desert area, very small town. And these kids who were originally from California, teenagers and older teenagers, had taken a vacation from California. There was 4 of them, 2 boys, 2 girls, and had gotten their pickup truck stuck in the sands of the desert outside of Goldfield. And they tried to dig themselves up, but couldn't do it. And we're like, well, guess we're just gonna have to spend the night here, and in the morning, one of us will walk back to town, which is, a few miles away, and get help. And so they all just resigned themselves to spending the night there, and we're sitting in the bed of the pickup truck talking, and the subject wandered around to UFOs at some point. And they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we saw one? And it was shortly after they talked about this when it did happen. And I know some skeptics especially will be like, well, they're talking about this and then it happens. This could be a tall tale, but no, this is a thing in UFO contact. Talking about them, thinking about them, mentally calling them down, can draw them in. This is CE5 work. It happens all the time. At any rate, a UFO drops down and completely freaks them out because it comes right over their truck, sends down a beam of light, pulls the truck out of the sand, and sets it back on the dirt road there.
Oh, wow.
Right? This is so wild. I remember thinking, my gosh, but I found 2 other cases immediately after that, researching for this book. But what I liked about this case is they all wanted to remain anonymous. Only one of them reported it to Newfork, I think it was, National UFO Reporting Center, many years later. So they're clearly not seeking attention or notoriety. And what ended up happening is he got back in touch with his former girlfriend because they had not seen each other in years and years and years. But he located her and called her up because he wanted to get confirmation and see what she remembered about it. And he didn't even have to bring it up. First thing she said, like, oh my God, it's you. Do you remember that time outside of Goldfield when the UFO came out and pulled the truck out? It's like, yeah, I do. What do you remember? And she outlined, she said everything that he remembered word for word. Her memory was exactly the same, except for one thing. He remembered it being quite scary, and he was screaming in fear. And she's like, no, no, I wasn't scared at all. I was laughing. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. So that's a real interesting case. And that's what got me digging deeper into this. And man, the cases I found, Karen, are so weird.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think truth is stranger than fiction for sure. So I just got a couple questions. First of all, this car lift phenomenon, what do they do with the cars? Like, do they put them on the ship, or do they drop them, or do they gently put them back down? And why do you think that ET does that?
Well, I'm going to have to speculate a little bit here on the second part of that question. But the first part, no, most cases, I don't think they're pulling people on board. Most of the people, there's a few cases where I think, yeah, perhaps so. But most no, because what goes on here is they pull the car up maybe 3 feet off the road, 6 feet, and will carry it. The cases vary here from a few feet to 100 yards or so, to a quarter mile, to a half mile, a mile, to even as far as 6 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a very famous case, which is one of Argentina's most famous cases, involving 2 race car drivers, actually, who had to drop out of the race because they had car trouble and fixed their car and were driving back. And this craft came down and lifted their car up and carried it 6 miles.
Oh my goodness.
This is all over the world, by the way. I've got cases in France, several in Canada, by the way, all
Mm-hmm.
across the US, South America. So this is worldwide. And they don't always lift the entire car up. One lady, she says it came down and lifted her car up on 2 wheels. On the, so, driving like at a 45-degree angle. And there's 2 cases where it lifts up just the rear end. And there was one case in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where it lifted the car up, set it back down, lifted it up, set it back down 6 times. 6, at least a half dozen times. So usually it's gently. Yeah, they'll not always. I mean, there was a case that got international headlines in Australia when the Knowles family, Faye Knowles and her 3 sons, were lifted up, and it basically dropped the car from a couple of feet up and blew out the tire. And yeah, for 4 of these cases, the car is injured, or damaged, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And in a few, yeah, pretty badly damaged. And by that, I mean, thousands of dollars to fix the undercarriage.
Yeah.
Or the windshield got shattered. Now, as to why, I wish I knew. I've thought about this a lot, because, this is similar, I think, to UFOs chasing cars down the road.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, taking it a step further. And I always wondered about the car chases, because I'm like, are these teenagers doing a joyride and showing off? It's the sort of thing that, that's what it sounds like. And I'm wondering if that's what's going on here. Honestly, it's a little bit of a display. I think that, honestly, this is intentional. I mean, we can say it very clearly. This is not an accidental byproduct.
It also seems to display an air of playfulness. We hear some really scary, UFO and space alien stories and experiences. But from what you're describing, it almost sounds like they're being a little bit playful, and also, yeah, just letting people know they're here, I guess, eh?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. It's almost as if they have a little bit of a sense of humor.
Yeah.
They're like, let's do this. And I will say that a lot of the people who have this experience do find it quite frightening. This is not like, yay, wow, look. People are like, oh my God. But they're not hurt, and they're set back down, and the UFO goes on its merry way. And I think this is exactly what is happening. It's part of a behavior that is well known, a display behavior. And I honestly think this is a very in your face, unforgettable way of saying, hello, we're real, we're here. This is something you're not going to forget. It's part of their publicity campaign, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is leading towards, at some point, I hope, open official contact, getting us
Mm-hmm.
used to the presence so we can, at some point have a more open relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, oh yeah, that sounds so good. I find it funny, but I have not been in a car that's been lifted, so I might experience it a bit differently. But I have seen, evidence of them, being somewhat playful, which I think is great personally. I get tired of all the scary stories. I'm not saying that I don't want to invalidate anyone's experience. I'm just saying that I think just like there's all different kinds of people and all different kinds of experiences, there's also all kinds of extraterrestrial experiences, which is why I'm so glad that you're a really thorough researcher so that you're not just getting carried away on anecdotal, evidence, although I guess some of it is. But I was going to ask you, is there one day of the year that has more UFO sightings than any other day?
Yes, and this was really startling to me, because I kind of always wondered that. UFO researchers have long known that the summer months, always have a spike of UFO activity. And I think the theory has always been, well, we have longer days,
Mm-hmm.
warmer out, and for whatever reason, yeah. I mean, there was speculation way back in the day that Mars was closer and that's where they were coming from, and that's why. That turned out to be not true. Uh, and I started hearing buzz about people seeing UFOs on the 4th of July. I thought, no, I'm sorry. If you're seeing a UFO on the 4th of July, you are probably misperceiving fireworks. And
Mm-hmm.
I just really didn't take those reports seriously, but I kept hearing about it. And I thought, let's take a look at the databases that are out there, such as MUFON, Mutual UFO Network,
Mm-hmm.
NUFORC, as I mentioned, and there's others. And I got an incredible shock, Karen. Uh, July is the best month to see a UFO in terms of activity. It's most active in July. But when I checked out July 4th, there was an enormous spike, not just 10 or 20% more. It was about 500% rise of sightings. By that I mean NUFORC, as an example, receives perhaps 10 reports a day. It can go down to
Wow.
5 or 2 or up to 20 even. But
Mm-hmm.
on 4th of July, it was like 100. And that's true for MUFON as well. I'm like, oh my
Interesting.
gosh, right? So I dug in deep. I'm like, okay, let's examine these reports. Because I had some myself. And I thought, let's see if they are fireworks. And it was a lot of work, Karen, because we're looking at several thousands of reports to sift through. And I
Wow.
will say that I was surprised to hear some people reporting what they believe were craft. When it sounded to me like they were reporting or seeing what we know of as sky lanterns, which is basically a paper type balloon,
Mm-hmm.
little candle in there, and up it goes from the hot air. You can see these online and certainly in person if you want. And they look quite impressive, I will say, once they get up there. And studying them, they do reach altitudes of 4,000 feet, I think,
Oh, wow.
and can stay aloft for 15 minutes, not much longer than that. But when they're up there, they look like giant orbs of light, fiery
Mm-hmm.
orange orbs, or red, depending on the balloon type thing. And it was clear to me that a lot of what people were seeing was those.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I am not so sure because UFOs have that exact appearance as well.
Mm-hmm.
It can look just like that, and it doesn't mean, I mean, with no way of telling one way or the other, I ended up discarding most of those because you couldn't tell, even though they
Mm-hmm.
could be UFOs, and I think probably some of them were. I
Mm-hmm.
left all those out. But in many of these cases, these objects were stock still, or wavering around, or started darting around, or were visible for more than 15 minutes. By that I mean an hour, 2 hours. And a good portion, a significant portion, were clearly not these, because people were seeing metallic craft with little lights, or a dome, or portholes. And it was so interesting, Karen, because they would appear right when the fireworks would start, watch the fireworks show, and then depart. And some were low enough where people could see entities through the windows.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is sometimes they would stay there after the fireworks show and put on another show that was better and far more impressive and dazzling than the actual fireworks show. And I figured out what's going on here. Again, I'm speculating, but what I think is going on here is ETs recognize the 4th of July as being a very special day, particularly here in the US, because that's almost exclusively where they shoot off fireworks on that day. But there are millions of people outside that night. They're all looking up. They're all in a good mood, and they're having barbecues and celebrating and communing with each other. And this is a perfect opportunity for, again, a display, an introduction. And I think that's what's going on here. They're taking advantage of an opportunity to show themselves. And I say that because they will put on displays. It's really cool. One case, if I may, comes to mind, which was really cool. This occurred in Glen, Mississippi. And this is in 1988. Mind you, there's multiple cases every single year of this. This was 1988, and the mother was standing in the doorway as her young son was shooting off little tiny fireworks. I thought this was just a particularly poignant and touching case because, they're alone and they're celebrating it together, and he's setting off these little fireworks when suddenly a fleet of objects shows up, 6 or 7 of these sort of V-shaped craft, which were quite large, like they estimate the size of a pickup truck. And they came swooping down and darting up and dancing around, going back and forth, coming together and putting on a honest to God show for the mother and son. And they sat there just watching this, absolutely awestruck, for 20 minutes. That's a long time.
That's quite a show.
Yeah, it would have gone on longer, but guess what? As happens sometimes in these cases, the military shows up, chase them off. This has been photographed, by the way. This has made newspapers. There's cases where objects were so obvious that it just created a whole media storm. It's really, really interesting. And I always thought, 4th of July is a terrible day to see a UFO. I'm reversing my opinion. If you want to see one, go out on the 4th of July. You've got a good chance, I think.
Well, I live in Canada and they celebrate here on the 1st of July. But after talking to you today, I'm gonna have a blanket and a lawn chair, be sleeping outside between the 1st and the 4th, see if I can see anything, because if that's the most likely day of the year, then I'd like to see if I can see anything. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to
go ahead.
Put an end note to those kinds of cases, because the vast majority of them are basically close encounters of the first kind, a simple sighting. I started thinking about it. I'm like, wait a second, no, we are calling them down. It's known that light displays do attract UFOs. So actually, more accurately, these are close encounters of the 5th kind. These are human-initiated encounters, essentially. And this is a great tool for those who are doing CE5 research, because this is essentially a great way to study UFOs in a laboratory setting, if you will. Bring your equipment out, get your compasses, your magnetometers, and your cameras and such, because this is a great way, evidently, to initiate a UFO encounter.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I know that a lot of the viewers are adventure hunters, so I'm sure that everyone's marking on their calendar. So basically, the 4th of July is UFO Day. I don't know if it is um, recognized as that, but it sure sounds like the 4th of July is UFO Day. Preston, I want to go back to the interaction again, some of the parts of your book that talk about interactions between ET and humans. And I was wondering, has anybody ever crashed into a UFO?
Yes. And this surprised me. I did know about a few cases, but I did not think it was a thing. But, after hearing another case and then another, this is what usually happens. I'm like, huh, I wonder if this is a thing. And hearing about a case which occurred in 1955, where a Air Force Major Mervyn Stevens, reported crashing into, quote, a flying saucer. That's what he said. Over Pixley.
Did he crash into it with a car or a plane or
A plane.
a plane? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Well, yeah, sorry, it was a plane. He was flying over Pixley. This is near Bakersfield in Southern California. And he says he struck a flying saucer. He had to do an emergency landing. And the Air Force, of course, tried to cover it up.
Of course.
But he had given a press, story. Talk to reporters, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And when that story came out, some additional witnesses said, "Oh, you know what? I was in that area at that time, and I saw it. I saw the UFO." At least two separate independent witnesses, groups of witnesses, saw UFOs at that time. They didn't see the actual collision. So the Air Force had to sort of backpedal a little bit and actually did release a statement saying that this crash did happen and the plane was damaged and it looked like something struck it from above. So that was one of the cases that got me interested. And I started looking into it, and yeah, Karen, it's planes, one case involving a train, many involving automobiles, and a couple involving boats. This does happen. It's statistically insignificant in terms of how often this happens. There are thousands upon thousands of pilot sightings, and often they will come right close to your plane, right, hover in front of well, not hover, they're moving along in front of the cockpit of the plane and dart off. And they never collide, but in a few cases they do. And one other airplane case was really interesting to me because it's very well verified. And this occurred to a pilot by the name of Carlos Montiel, who was flying a little plane, a Piper Aztec. This was in 1974 over Mexico City. And this was an old plane. He was a little bit worried about it. And things were going well. There was no sign of any engine trouble. But as he's on approach to Mexico City, 3 discs showed up. And 2 came right next to his plane, and 1 came right under it, lifted up, and bunk, bendered his landing.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And it freaked this poor guy out naturally.
Sure.
He called the control tower weeping, hyperventilating, in a panic. Like, oh my God, this is happening. And it was a pretty brief encounter. And the UFOs darted off. He landed. There was no damage to the plane. He was traumatized. They took him to the doctor and checked him out. He was fine. But this was a big case. It got a lot of publicity. He's still talking about it to this day. You can see firsthand interviews with him online. And yeah, I found about a dozen cases of plane encounters like this, and some very well verified. Usually it's just a little dent on the plane. Like there was a Chinese case where it dented the nose cone pretty bad. But there's a few cases where the planes did crash as well. But I thought the car cases were even more interesting. And, yeah, one involving a train and a couple involving boats. It's pretty interesting.
That is super interesting. I would think that airports would have some interaction. And the interesting thing about airports is air traffic controllers are known for being sober, intelligent, present. Their job depends on it. And I'm wondering if there are reports of UFOs interacting with airports.
Yes. Yeah. And this was very, very interesting to me. There's quite a few of them. And what I found, I was writing UFOs over California. And I discovered several cases of UFOs hovering over LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. And as I dug deeper into it, it wasn't just a few cases, Karen. I collected about a half dozen or more cases of UFOs over LAX alone over a period of decades.
Mm-hmm.
And they were quite brazen. They would come down right in front of the airport control towers and hover for 15 minutes at a time. And every 5 or 10 years, LAX would have a major encounter. I was not at the airport, but in LA, obviously. And I remember when it came on the news one night, and I'm like, oh my God. I was at the bookstore the next day, and the guy I started talking to, he was in front of the UFO section. He's like, oh, I was there, I saw it, they were red lights. I got to talk to some first-hand witnesses about this. And I ended up writing an article and outlining a few other cases that I found, but not really connecting the dots. But then there was that very famous, which I'm sure you've heard of, the Chicago O'Hare Airport incident.
Mm-hmm.
In brief, that occurred, I think it was in 2001 or thereabouts. And it's a really, no, 2006, that's right. And this was such a great case because this object, this very large silver disc, this is during the day, by the way, hovered over gate C-17 and maybe 100 feet up. And air traffic controllers in the towers, nearby towers, saw it and reported it. And meanwhile, pilots are coming in and they're like, yeah, we see it. And baggage handlers saw it too, and tourists, of course. And now you can see actual photographs of this object. And what's really interesting about this case is that it was very effectively covered up for quite some time until a mainstream journalist happened to talk to one of the baggage handlers from United Airlines. And he said, oh yeah, we all saw it. We reported to our superiors, and our superiors made it very clear you are not to talk about this period. But he felt obligated to talk about it. And so this reporter contacts the superiors at United Airlines, and they're like, no, nothing to it. And he's like, well, I want you to know
Nothing to see here.
I've talked to your baggage handlers, because he started getting multiple testimonies and he's contacting the FAA. He did his job and got proof, essentially. And so United Airlines was caught red-handed lying about it. And this led to a full-on expose. And you can now hear the voice recordings from the people in that airport tower talking about this sighting. It's very well verified, a lot of witnesses to it, and photographs as well. And this thing went straight up through the clouds and created a hole punch cloud. So you can see this perfect circle as it went up through a very low cloud layer. So they know how it couldn't have been over 1,000 feet, because I think the cloud ceiling was like 3,000 feet. And when I heard that, I'm like, ooh, LAX. And I remember hearing one about Heathrow. So I dug deep. And like I said, I've got, there's a lot of databases. But I subscribed to the UFO news clipping service for years. I've got decades of newspaper articles. And I hit a gold mine when I stumbled on this particular subject. And it wasn't just hovering. This is what made it's so interesting to me, Karen, is there's a bunch of these cases of these objects landing on the tarmac, a dozen cases, and several cases of humanoids coming out. And people talking to them. It's outrageous. I had no idea. So this was puzzling to me. And my first thought was, yeah, this is a display again. They obviously want to be seen. Why else?
Mm-hmm.
There's radar, there's lookouts, there's millions of people watching. I mean, airports are generally in very crowded areas.
Oh, yeah.
And all over the world. I mean, I'm telling you, no country was left untouched. I found well over 50 cases. I had to narrow it down. I'm like, I'm gonna have to write a book about this. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I've got too many books I want to write. I'm just gonna put a chapter. So I did cut out some cases because it started to get really repetitive when all these UFOs are constantly hovering over airports. So this could be preparation for a worldwide landing. That's one of my speculations. Not entirely speculation. I asked contactees about it. Dolly Safran. You may, I think we talked about her.
Yes, yes. Actually, I've had you both on my show before.
Yeah,
So
that's what I thought. Yeah, she's a contactee.
yeah,
I asked her
sure
about
is.
it. She's like, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. This could be, this is absolutely intentional. So I think that there are very good reasons for this.
Yeah, I also think that if they wait for the powers that be to announce stuff, it ain't going to happen. So I think they're going more directly to the people now, which I think is a really good move. But Preston, I want to switch over subjects a little bit, if that's okay. And
Yeah.
I was really intrigued and wondered if you could tell us more about ETs, UFOs, and levitation. So some people are experiencing levitation. Is it that they're being taught how to do it? Is there a reason for it? Can you tell us a bit about that from your book? Check out my website and find many valuable resources. There's the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation. This is a free, comprehensive online course. Learn about detoxification and nutrition, grounding and spiritual practices, and an advanced version of the law of attraction, giving you more of what you really want out of life. I also have my Zendomes Orgonite, which is my unique brand of orgone generators. They're ethically sourced and handmade by a friend of mine, and they're double charged for maximum effect. I also carry Comfort Crystals, which is a limited collection of energetically infused semi-precious stones. I have an array of vital services, so you can get the one-on-one support that you've been looking for. Also coaching, guidance, and I do assessments and also workshops. And then again, there are the many free resources available on my website. Wisdom to assist with energetic ascension into physical, mental, and spiritual paradise. Let us share our quantum work with you. It's your turn to heal, evolve, and thrive. Believe in your ability to succeed. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I kept running into this. And I sort of overlooked it thinking, well, this is just high strangeness at work with UFO encounters. But I remember reading about a case from Jacques Vallée, true pioneer in this field, who reported about a medical doctor in France who had an encounter. And in the weeks following his encounter, he spontaneously levitated twice. Mind you, he's not being lifted up by a UFO. He's in his home. This is internally generated. This is a byproduct of contact. This is the way it was presented in Jacques Vallée's case. And his wife witnessed it. This was well verified. I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because I think, if I remember correctly, Whitley Strieber reported this. So I looked it up in his book, Communion or Transformation. It was one of those books. And yeah, July of 1986, Whitley Strieber, when he was in his cabin in upstate New York, woke up bumping into the ceiling and was floating around his room for a good, 5 or 10 minutes. And eventually came back down in his bed. And even the next morning, he felt like he was slightly weightless. I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? And the dots start, my brain starts, the wheels in my brain start going. And I'm like, I know I've heard of another case. Where is it? It was Stephen Greer.
Oh, yes, Stephen.
Yeah, who's very well known in this field.
He is.
And I remember reading about it in one of his books. And so I grabbed the book, and sure enough, right after he had his first major contact at age 17, where he was taken on board and had a very nice meditative experience with the Greys, they put him back down. This is outside of Boone in North Carolina. And he's walking home, and doing, doing, he starts levitating, taking 20, 30, 40-foot strides. He's floating. And this is his report. I don't think he knew of these other cases. But he said it happened later again as an adult. He was just walking down a pathway, and boom, he finds himself floating down this pathway. As soon as he realized what he was doing, he dropped that back down. So I get to do what I like to do, dig deep. And Bud Hopkins had cases. He had 2 or 3. And I was interested because I had a couple myself already. There was a Marine officer that I interviewed who had encounters as a little boy, 5 years old. He was taken on board over a period of a week. This is in Southern California. And right after one of his encounters, he spontaneously levitated in his bedroom. He's walking on the ceiling and freaking his he ran and told his mom, and she's like, "You're crazy. What are you talking about? Go outside and play." Hide and seek, and levitated right up to the top of the building and saw where every kid was, and went and got them. Needless to say, that ended the hide and seek. So I started asking people, and this is absolutely a thing. I started getting a lot of reports. I reported on this in the book Symmetry with Dolly Safran. I asked her, I'm like, I don't suppose you've ever levitated. And she's like, well, actually, yes. Very pronounced experiences with her. I mean, it happened over and over again. But I keep bringing this up. I've done a few other podcasts. I brought this up on a podcast, and the guy who's the podcaster is like a contactee himself, as many of you guys are. And he's like, oh, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because that happened to me when I was a kid. I don't tell people. They look at you like you're crazy. But I absolutely flew around my room. So yeah, this is a byproduct, I think, of UFO contact. People who have contact are often profoundly psychic, even before, but definitely after. There's something about contact that is spiritually transformative. People who have contact know this because they'll start having mediumistic abilities, or healing, or blow out computers and light bulbs and anything electric. It's something to do with your bioelectric field going on here. In fact, one guy, because I did a YouTube episode about this, he saw it. He's like, I have to talk to you. And I'm like, sure. And I called him up, and he's like, I'm so glad. I mean, he's practically in tears. He says, I have not been able to find any information about this anywhere, and I don't dare talk to anybody. But he had contact as a kid and had about 50 levitation episodes following contact. It was always when he was alone. He lived alone with his dad who worked. So this is a thing. They're waking us up psychically. This points towards their mission with us, is to wake us up to our own abilities. And levitation is absolutely one of them.
So I was just going to ask you, so did these people generally experience the levitation experience in close proximity or in a short period of time from a sighting? Or are they able to continue to do this ever since their sighting? Or I'm just wondering if it corresponds directly to the sighting.
Usually it's an onboard experience.
On board. Mhm.
significant. And yeah, generally speaking, it is that day, the next day, or shortly after, within
Mhm.
weeks. Not always. I mean, in Dolly's case, she got quite good at it. But then again, she was having a lot of contact.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, no, it's like, well, one guy who I did talk to personally, he and his sister were taken on board, let go, and they went down to the basement and they flew around for the next hour inside the basement. They thought it was the funnest
Wow.
thing. And no, it faded after that. They could never do it. So,
Mhm.
so often this is well, I don't want to say completely temporary, because look at Stephen Greer's case. Yeah, it happened immediately after he was taken on board, but years later, it happened again.
Mhm.
And I know that happened with a guy interviewed by Ray Hernandez, who is prominent in this field, part of the Free organization. Because I asked him about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, my friend Alberto Fernandez, is a contactee, and he doesn't remember levitating, but his wife woke up one day and Alberto was floating above the bed." And that was sometime after contact. So yeah, I think it can manifest at any time, honestly.
Mhm. Mhm. Very interesting. Yeah, I love the way this book covers all kinds of weird and fantastical stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the phenomenon of UFOs and hitchhikers? Yeah, that
Yeah.
was super interesting.
This was actually really funny to me, because I did not have any idea that this was something that could even happen. But I was reading Artie Six Killer Clark's books, and I love her as a researcher. I think she's very straightforward, very facts only, not fear based, and does a really good job. She's concentrated mostly on firsthand testimonies of indigenous peoples, Native
Mm-hmm.
Americans across the US, but all across South America. And has some, I just love her books. I mean, they're fantastic. And she talks about this gentleman from Arizona, a Native American guy by the name of Dakota. And one evening he was driving from Window Rock in Arizona to Chinle, Arizona, a 1 hour drive. And this is a desert highway. There is nothing out there. I did the drive on Google. I Googled the whole thing. I've been there actually, but I checked it out to make, because I always like to verify everything to the extent that I can. Nothing's there. And he's driving along and is about halfway between the two towns and sees a gentleman by the side of the road, sort of asking for a ride. I'm thinking he's another Native American, because this is a big spot for Native Americans. He stops to pick him up and realizes at this point that this man is not wearing, jeans and a t-shirt, as most people would be. He's wearing this shimmery, weird white jumpsuit. And he's not Native American. He's got very pale skin, bright blue, kind of almond shaped eyes, extremely blonde, white blonde hair, very clear complexion, very unusual looking. And he realized this guy is a little peculiar. And I don't remember if they had a conversation or not. I'd have to look that up, but I don't believe they talked much really at all, because no longer had they, he got on board into the car and they're driving along when they came upon a landed UFO in the middle of the highway. And this hitchhiker gets out, walks into the UFO, comes back out with another guy, and pulls Dakota on board. He ends up having this long, involved onboard experience. Eventually, is put back into the car, and by the time he gets to Chinle, Arizona, it's 3 hours later.
Oh
So
my
that was,
goodness.
and when I read that account, I'm like, I've heard this before.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to do a lot of digging to get the 13 cases I found, but it was worth it. Oh my God. If I can cover one more case real quick, because
Sure.
it's it's so strange. This one occurred. Where was this? This was somewhere in Peru. That's right. It was in, yeah, Peru. And this guy is on his, no, Brazil. That's right. It was outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. This was a relatively recent case, 2003.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's driving along on his way to work and sees someone standing by the side of the road. And as often happens in some of these cases, he felt compelled to stop. And I've got cases involving a couple of ladies who don't pick up hitchhikers, but they couldn't help themselves. So this guy's driving alone and he feels compelled to stop to pick up this short little man standing by the side of the road. And he does. And this man does not look normal. He's got these dark, buggy eyes. He's got this weird, oily skin. His clothes are strange. His shoes are not normal. They've got real thick soles. He's, cat-like eyes. He's got a real strange odor. He's wearing a jumpsuit, as they often do. And he tries to talk to this guy, and the guy just speaks in this unintelligible language and points ahead as if go forward. And he did, of course, kept driving. And he kept looking at them and saw that this guy had 6 fingers on his hands. He said the skin looked almost clay-like, and tried several times to talk to him, but the guy just wouldn't talk and kept pointing. Really bad odor as well. And finally motions the guy to stop, which he does. And the figure jumps out and walks into the wilderness. That's beyond bizarre. Some of these cases do end up being onboard experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was a case in Arizona where 2 ladies, as I mentioned, were driving along. It's this beautiful blonde man. He's so handsome. And they stop, and he gets on into the car, and they were surprised they stopped because they don't pick up hitchhikers. It's just not a good idea, especially out in the middle of the desert.
Mm.
He starts he starts talking to them in this sing-song voice. Like, don't worry, we know, I'm so glad to see you. You're gonna be just fine. Don't be afraid, as the car lifts up off the highway and zoink right into a UFO. And they have this long involved experience, and were set back down and proceeded to the next town and called their family. And the family had called the police. They were missing for 5 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but just like Travis Walton, this was so yeah, that was a big experience for them. But this happened.
Did they have recall of the full 5 days, or did they just think they were gone for a few minutes?
For about an hour or so.
Yeah.
One of the
Very
ladies
interesting.
about it. She's like, no, forget it. Not going to talk about it. It frightened her too much. But the other lady had regular contact following this. It did create stress on her family. She ended up getting a divorce. Kids were having encounters too. But yeah, this happens all over the world. I got a case in Ukraine. Same thing. A beautiful, handsome, blonde man standing by the side of the road. And there was a father and his daughter in the car, and the daughter's like, stop, look at him, stop. And they ended up, again, having an onboard experience. So this is, in some ways, I think, a way of bringing people on board a craft, but not always. Sometimes it's just a guy needs a lift. It's so strange.
It is strange. It's all so strange. But I think part of the reason why it's so strange too is because we've been this information, for lack of a better word, has been censored from the mainstream and the common everyday experiences. But I think we're getting to the point now where you just can't shut the closet door anymore. It's so much is busting out and coming out in the open. And speaking of world leaders, I think you mentioned, well, not in our conversation, but in some of my notes, that that sometimes these beings who clearly are not from around here ask to be taken to a representative of authority, or a leader, for lack of a better term. Do you want to comment about that?
Yeah. Well, in essence, there's something very interesting about this whole UFO phenomenon, because there's a cliche that's if ETs would come down, they'd land on the White House lawn and say, "Take me to your leader." This is kind of
Mm-hmm.
how everyone would think they would react, because I think that's
Mm-hmm.
how we would do it. If we were to contact another species, we go to their planet and like, who's in charge here? Take
Yeah, no kidding.
and people, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? If they're real, why not just let themselves be known? And I always
Mm-hmm.
say, well, listen, in 1952, July, they pretty much did. They hovered right over the White House. It very well may have landed but we did not receive them warmly. We
Mm-hmm.
scrambled jets after them. And so I think that very well could have happened if we were more open to the subject and not covering it up and weren't so warlike and aggressive.
Yes.
But hearing
I- I've
about,
heard I, I've heard too that sometimes they're more afraid of us than we are of them because they're not going to do, the senseless violence that humans are quite capable of.
yeah, exactly. But I began to wonder, I'm like, have they ever, because we know people all over the world of all levels of society have been contacted. People within the military, people who are, doctors and lawyers and police officers and homeless people and secretaries and housewives and musicians, everybody from all levels of society have experienced contact. And I'm thinking, well, if that's true, we have to have world leaders who are being contacted as well.
You'd think. Mm-hmm.
Right. And we know, of course, there was this famous Edwards Air Force uh, contact event in 1954 with President Eisenhower, which is fairly well verified, though he never personally talked about it. So I started looking for cases involving people who are world leaders of any type. And I was really impressed. I mean, what really kind of started this journey for me, this investigation, was hearing Governor Fife Symington finally come clean and said he was, in fact, a witness to the Phoenix Lights, which was in 1996, of course. I thought, you know what? I've heard of other governors seeing UFOs. And in fact, I knew that Governor John Gilligan of Ohio had seen a UFO back in 1973. I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because Governor Ron Reagan of California saw one in 1974. And guess what? Jimmy Carter saw one in 1975.
Mm-hmm.
Or about to be. And I'm like, wow, 73, 74, 75. Are they going from state to state contacting people who are in high levels of government office? And that's certainly what it looks like. And yes, I found Congress people, senators, representatives, governors, and of course, we do know presidents have seen UFOs. And yeah, there's quite a few of them. In fact, the earliest case I could find involved Arizona's first female congressperson, Isabella King, who in 1952 had a very close-up sighting. And Senator Richard Russell of Georgia had a very close-up sighting in 1955. He was not alone. In all of these cases, they do have other witnesses, all of them, which I find very interesting. But yeah, Wyoming Representative Malcolm Wallop, who's very well known and very well respected, had an encounter in 1971. Of course, Dennis Kucinich, as you may recall, went public with his sighting when he was a presidential running for president, and admitted that he had seen one in 1982. And it's not just U.S., of course. This is no surprise worldwide. But Mexican President Pedro Ferris saw a UFO in 1974 and went public, to his credit. Of course, there were a lot of people around him who were seeing UFOs at that time. But the president of Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, saw a UFO in 1979. He had people with him as well. So yeah, even what's his name? Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, who was the president or the head of Kalmykia in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
In public with his not only sighting, Karen, he was pulled on board, had a long conversation with human-like ETs. They took him to their planet, the whole deal. And you can see interviews with him. He's an outstanding resume. I mean, a real good witness. Very
Mm-hmm.
level-headed, very intelligent. And again, when public, makes me wonder how many, and I know that there are a lot of world leaders who have had direct contact and are not talking because, of course, it's political suicide or tantamount to it to go
Mm-hmm.
public with something like this. But yeah, I mean, Idi Amin, who's not a good man, uh, had an encounter. The Iranian president, Hassan Rouhani, went public with his sighting in 2013. He was a kid at the time, but still, he was a sitting head of state and was talking about his own encounters. So yeah, people always ask, why don't they go to world leaders? Well, they do, and they are.
Mm-hmm. They
And this
do
is
and they
nothing,
are.
it's just been very effectively covered up.
Mm-hmm.
Such a shame. I'm so disappointed with how our governments are handling this. Shame on them. Shame for shame.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. So, we got just a couple more minutes, Preston. I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to tell the viewers about your latest book. Is there any other experiences you want to share or anything you want to say about it? And I'm wondering if there might be a number 5 coming around in the next year or so. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I mean, we didn't get a chance to cover it all. It would take, hours and hours to cover everything in the book, but I did a chapter on the connection between ETs and fertilizer, which is really bizarre and fascinating. Another on cases where people, we have a sort of fight or flight tendency when confronted with something strange. And there's a surprising number of cases of people who physically attacked greys, punching them out, kicking them in the neck, attacking them. So I did a chapter on that because, yeah, this can be frightening for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in the book that I think people might find really interesting and stuff they haven't heard before. And yes, there is going to be a number 5. I'm more than halfway through it. Got some really thrilling stuff because I know as I was putting this one together, I thought this is probably going to be it. But no, it wasn't. What's new about volume 5 is these are some stuff that I have not published before in magazines.
Mm-hmm.
About 5 of the articles are previously published, but a lot of it's going to be absolutely brand new and original. So I'm excited about that. Yeah, I'm working on a book about humanoids. Keeping busy. I love doing this stuff, as you know.
Yes, yes. And I'm very glad that you love to do this stuff because you're so very good at it. Preston, before we close out for today, I also was wondering if you could give, I know this is just your opinion I'm asking for because it's hard to know, for sure what's going on. But what do you think ET's message is to us? What do you think their purpose for being here, their purpose for contacting Dolly, for myself, for being obviously real things around airports and politicians? What do you think their main goal is? What are they trying to achieve, and are they trying to help us?
Oh, that's an easy question. That's the $1 million question, of course. But having talked to so many people who've had this experience, I do feel that they are benevolent. I do feel that we have nothing to fear from them, and that is one of their messages. They are here to guide. They're here to teach. Healing is a big part of their mission. I think another part is to introduce us to their presence, let us know that we're not alone. We've never been alone. I think also they're very concerned about how we treat our planet, how we treat each other. So we get a lot of messages along those lines of warning about nuclear proliferation and our warlike ways and breeding corruption and destruction of the environment and so forth. Definitely, they're very concerned about our own lack of spiritual progress. So we do see a lot of that, where we did talk about how they want to wake us up to our own abilities. And I won't call them supernatural because they're not. Yeah, healing, psychic abilities, remote viewing, astral projection, past life recall, all of that, levitation, precognition, clairvoyance, and the fact that we are eternal beings, that death is a lie, that we actually do live forever. So I think all of these, I mean, and don't believe me, go ahead and examine the onboard experience objectively and in detail, and you can see this for yourself. Someone's taken on board, they're physically healed. They're shown the engine room and told how the craft works. They're taken up to the helm and told how to fly the craft. They're taught all of this stuff, given all kinds of guidance and information. That ultimately, I think, is their goal. They look upon us as their children, as their friends, their brothers and sisters. I think they feel a sense of duty like anyone does when they see someone falling down on the street or without food. They want to help out of just a sense of duty, out of doing the right thing, because these are highly evolved people. We shouldn't really be calling them aliens. They're not aliens. And even the term extraterrestrial is a little bit of a misnomer, because everyone in the universe is an extraterrestrial. That's one of their messages. We are you. You are us. We are one. So I think in a nutshell, a big nutshell, that is their goal.
I would agree with you 100%. Now I have one other, I'd like to get your thoughts on something else. And this is just based on my own observation. You know, looking at history, I'm very interested in history and also the alternative histories that are also available now. And it's become fairly apparent to me that the powers that be have actually programmed us generation after generation to not be in touch with our gifts and our spiritual power. And now we've got, you know, we probably always did have ET contact, but you know, it's certainly well documented now, and case in point, your books and all the information and research that you've done. And I'm just wondering how this is going to play out. I mean, obviously we don't have a crystal ball, but how will this play out? Because the very forces that have basically benefit for us being ignorant, they're the ones that are also censoring and discrediting those of us who've had experiences or research experiences. How do you see this playing out? Because if the world leaders, well, obviously they're willing to go to great lengths to keep us ignorant, because that helps with the shenanigans. I'll just say that. It's a blanket word for all kinds of things going on this planet. But I'm just wondering, how do you see this playing out? Because I see, you know, our extraterrestrial brothers and sisters and cousins as being in a little bit different kind of opposed to where the world leaders are. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling a bit here. I just wanted to know, how do you see things playing out in the near future?
Well, it's impossible to say for sure. I wish I knew. I do have my ideas about it in terms of how our governments are going to act with this subject. I have really no hope that they'll ever be truthful or transparent or forthcoming with this subject. I do not trust them with it, despite the tiny little recent disclosures of them talking about sightings and speculating upon the possibility that they were extraterrestrial in origin. I find that more deceptive than anything. I do not trust them. And the buzz is certainly within the UFO community that they're going to put forth a false ET threat narrative and back it up with actual actions and stage an alien attack, which is so unfortunate. I think that's probably what they're going to do. That's terrible, but they're going to go to their graves lying about this. I don't think any of the main governments will ever do the right thing. So I'm really sad about that, but it is what it is. I do think our planet is in trouble. So I think that's part of the reason behind this, is that we are facing some real heavy duty times up ahead. So in terms of the ET side of it, I think they're perfectly aware of all this. They've done their best to try to wake up our leaders to do the right thing and have not been able to do so. And respecting free will and autonomy and karma, they're not going to, take over or anything. I don't foresee that at all. I think they do or will continue to interact with humanity at large. But talking to Dolly, she's explained this in detail in the book Symmetry, that they've bugged out at this point because our magnetic field is failing and we're facing an honest to God existential crisis. So I do think at some point, and this is backed up by many other contactees who've received the same message, that there could be a mass landing and an evacuation. And that will be the sort of disclosure that everyone who's in this field and are honestly researching it will hope does happen. I think it's inevitable at some point that the truth does come out. You can't hide the sky. The truth is indestructible. You can alter it. You can try to hide it. You can distort it. But ultimately, you cannot destroy the truth. And we know this is a real phenomenon. Anyone who's had an experience knows. And ultimately, that's where true knowledge comes from, this personal experience, which is why they put on these displays, which is why they've conducted what amounts to a grassroots movement and shown themselves to so many people. It's why there's been such an escalation of onboard experiences since the modern age of UFOs and the nuclear age. So I think, that's what we're looking to in the future, is absolute, full, open, official contact, but probably only when it becomes absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I see it happening very similarly myself. And of course, I don't have an exact idea of what's going to happen, but I'm just being as prepared as possible. And for all our beautiful viewers out there, there will be a complete list of all of Preston's books in the description below. So you can pick through and see what you might be interested in. And you can order it from Preston's website, which will also be in the credits. Preston, do you want to just say your website URL just for people who are listening to the audio only version of this podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Just punch my name in. It should take you there, but the actual address for my website is prestondennett.weebly.com. I'm also on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and you can get my books through my website or through Amazon or Barnes & Noble or other online retailers and at bookstores.
Wonderful. Well, Preston, I want to thank you so much for making the time to be on this show. I'm going to have some links below also of previous appearances that you have done on the Quantum Guide show for people who want to catch up and learn more about some of your other books. And I just appreciate you so much and the work you do. And, you're Captain Dependable as far as I'm concerned. And I really appreciate you so much. I want to thank you so much for being here. And also the viewers. Without you, I wouldn't have a show. I appreciate you also very, very much. So please like this video, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and please share this video with your family and your friends. And so for today, we'll say bye-bye, and we'll see you next week on the Quantum Guide Show. Thank you for joining us on the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change that you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to my YouTube, Odyssey, and Telegram channels. Like this video and share it with your friends. You can also find the Quantum Guide Show and my other podcast called Aliens and Astrology on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network. That's www.forbiddenknowledge.news. And while you're at it, check out my website, www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com, where you will find some amazing products and services and an abundance of free resources to help you with your journey. All of the links are in the description below. And in the meantime, until we see you next week, keep up the good work.
Puts all my inner strife to rest, for time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less, and the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul I do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all in